she's making the point that human beings seem to have a built-in affinity for positive reinforcement, for people liking us, for people saying good things. Now, there's a whole lot of different provisos we're going to have to put in that. I would say, first of all, though, in terms of the 5 love languages, if you start carefully working through these songs, it's pretty evident they do things for each other. And sometimes it's feeding. So there's some food in there. And sometimes it's gifts. And sometimes the chorus says they're going to make some things for the beloved and for the lover. And so that, again, there's gifts. So that when you actually start playing with this, in an analytical way, you can start ferreting out different parts of the Song of Solomon that do fit with the 5 love languages to a certain extent. That there's evidence in here that this conversation is giving away the fact that they are doing things for each other. They care about each other in more than just words, right? But the second thing about that, there's a big difference in developing confidence in people. This is something I spent a lot of my life trying to do, and I was blessed by God to have Alice work with me, and we have 3 children who have lots of confidence. One of the things about building confidence in other people, building up and nurturing a husband or a wife or whatever, is recognizing that the character of our words matter. And so even though other people like good things, they have to be honest good things. And so descriptive praise, where you say what you did and you specify, you describe the thing that was good, and you say that was beautiful. That's different than saying, I really like you. If I say I like you, I'm still the judge. I'm still in the driver's seat. I'm still in the power position. If I say you did X and it was beautiful, you put that other person in the driver's seat. They're in the power position. And just how we therefore praise one another. And it's interesting that these songs say things like, you are, my beloved is, not about I like. And so I did a little thing when I started. I knew I was going to start teaching this back in the summer. I thought I was going to teach in the fall. Wasn't sure what I was going to teach. They asked me to teach this in spring. They asked me to teach this then in the summer. So I just Googled, the most favorite love songs, love duets, and I just went through them. And our culture is in love with talking about how in love they are, but they're not really good at doing love songs. They really aren't. You just Google it and look at the ones. I mean, they talk about how, I feel so wonderful, and gee, it's just great. Islands in the stream, all that kind of thing. But what you don't get is, my beloved is mine and I am my beloved's. You get a little bit, not a lot. And you get none of the business about how her eyes are like this and his hands are like that, and, he has an abdomen like ivory or, whatever. You don't get a lot of that in our modern songs because we don't do a lot of descriptive praising. We still want the singer to be in charge. It's not a real helpful way to build up another person. And flattery is really damaging. If you start coming to me and you start telling me wonderful things that are descriptive, that are real to me about me, that's one thing. But I'm 72 years old, and I used to run a 9,900, and let me tell you, I can hardly walk around without falling down now. So if you say, boy, I just love how graceful you are and how, I'm not going to be vulnerable with you. Okay? No way I'm taking my clothes off because you're a liar. Okay? And, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. I mean, a kid who's 12 months old knows that. And so when you're going to really love somebody, you got to tell them things that are honest, that they'll buy, right? That may get into the subculture of love language that you're talking about. You have to send a message in a language that they can receive, right? That's part of what you're saying. But what I'm saying is, I'm going to go a different direction on this. If you try to build up a kid and their self-esteem by saying, Mama really loves you, when the kid has just let 5 soccer goals go by him, you've wasted your time. You're ruining the kid's self-esteem. They think Mama's a liar, and they think that other adults are going to be liars too. Kids know what's going on. Let me tell you, spouses know even better than kids. What you have to do is permit people to set goals, achieve those goals, give descriptive realities, and then say, I saw that, and that was great. Catch them doing something good. And Alice does that for me. I could not be Ed without that. And I tried to do that for her. I hope that I'm useful with that. But this is something that's not accidental. When James says that the tongue can't be tamed, but it can be bridled, the way all the body must be bridled by having that heart that's dedicated to love, James is not just, smacking his teeth. This is real stuff. And so by having that kind of love, that we then express in ways that are real and honest, but that actually build up the other person, the relationship can be much better. We can help actually build up and nurture and not just puff up with flattery and make arrogant, right? The Bible has a big difference between arrogance, which is puffing up in the Greek, and edifying, which is building up in the Greek. And everybody knows that if you lift weights, you build up, but if you get one of those phony rubber suits and you pump it full of air, you're not built up at all, you're just puffed up, right? And we're trying to build up that other person in that. Did I get at what you were after? Do you have other observations along that line? Terry? Yes. Time out. Let's look at chapter 4, verse 1. He's talking a little bit here about the fact that this doesn't have an end point, okay? That this is a perpetual lifetime, and he gets to chapter 4, verse 1. Go ahead, Terry. Yeah. 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 Yes. 1 Peter. Yes, chapter 3. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Terry makes a great point that this isn't, there's no point where they live happily ever after. Okay, they are living happily ever after, but there's no statement they lived happily ever after past tense. That doesn't happen. There's no, spike the football. Okay, we finally got there. Now we're married. We can spike the football. We just go back to being normal. David Barnes said something back in the mid-'80s when he did a deal on marriage, that I really liked. He said, familiarity breeds contempt among the contemptuous. And so the key thing is for me not to be contemptuous, because as Terry was saying, older people sometimes, as the doctor Terry would observe older people coming in, and he would be working with them, trying to help them in terms of their health, and the conversations they would have were very toxic. Okay, toxic can be misunderstood and misapplied, but there is such a thing as toxicity in relationships. There are ways that we can be destructive, and it's usually predatory. And usually what happens is somebody, I'll just do some psychobabble, maybe I'm a little insecure, so I start dumping on my wife, or I start cutting her down, or whatever, so that I then take my problem and I express it in a way that's not helpful for Alice, and she then has to forbear and forgive to get by my artificial stumbling block that I've thrown in front of her. And so it's easy to do that, not just when you're older. I mean, I've seen it with younger people. We've all seen this in different contexts. But your point then is, or the point that I think that implies, is we've got to keep doing that. That this is something that we are responsible for. If you're married, I've been married 51 years now. Some of you have been married 60 years and more. And we see it, the other side of the coin from what Terry's saying. When you're around Christians who've been married for a long time successfully, I don't mean they just didn't get divorced. I mean successfully. You notice some things about how they talk to each other. And it's different than the way people in the world talk. And it gets at what Terry's saying. That this isn't an area where you get to that point and then, okay, now I can go back to normal. This is the new normal. This is the new. So when Jesus says in Matthew 12 and in Matthew 15, everything comes out of the heart, and he gets specific about talk. Every idle word will be judged. The idle words that I give to Alice, they're going to be judged because they disclose my heart. They expose me, the real me, that needs to continue to repent. Am I ever going to be perfect about that? No. Does that mean I'm ever off the hook to try to get better? No. Because if I quit trying to get better, I'm going to have problems develop in my relationships, not only with my wife, but others. Is that after what you're after, Terry? It's a great, important point. Yeah, there's a couple of hands. Is that one in the back? Was that Bill? No? Okay. Dennis again. Dennis again, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Dennis makes an important point that this time through it really, has emerged how important it is that we communicate in these things. And he raises a couple of interesting questions. One is that men are not real good at this. Sometimes women aren't either. Okay, it's really not in our culture. The subculture has encouraged men, in a variety of ways that I don't have time to go through, to under-communicate or to be predatory in our choice of things we choose to communicate. And all of us are careful in what we communicate with, even with people that we're very intimate with, because of the vulnerability business. We're not going to. It's hard to be completely naked about everything, even when you trust people, because your trusting muscle may be broken, right? The other person can be perfectly trustworthy, but if my trusting muscle is having trouble, I'm not going to necessarily feel comfortable. But if I can somehow prime the pump, and the way that you get good at something, as everybody knows, is practice. And so that if we want to get better as a man, we can need to practice, and my way of doing that would be to write it down, and then practice what I've written down. If you don't want to memorize things and make it sound arbitrary, then of course the better way to do it would be to change your heart, and start just taking a chance by talking about these things. But that helps the relationships to be more sound, more healthy, and less predatory, less toxic. Okay, now. Get to the woke business. I've known people all my life who were woke. If what we mean by woke is they're just and they're kind and they're fair and they're gentle and they're compassionate and they think about the other person's point of view. I've known men and women. I've known men when I was a kid. There were men who would express themselves, and they were very much that way. But I've also known a lot of people who aren't. And so that it really isn't a matter of trying to get distracted by our culture's artificial conversations about trying to redefine what being asleep and awake are. We need to actually be awake. Romans says, we're not of the night, so we need to awake, you who are asleep, and rise from the dead, as Ephesians says, right? Does that get at what you were getting at, Dennis? Okay, Debbie had a hand. No? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Debbie raises the $64,000 question for males like me. And that is that the New Testament says the husband is the one who needs to take the lead. Dennis made the point correctly that the husband says a lot of good things in Song of Solomon. It's true that the wife begins and ends with her exciting invitations and suggestions. But it's in the middle. The man does a lot of the talking in ways that are upbuilding and strengthening and that are important. Ephesians 5, husbands and wives. The first commandment there is that we all be in subjection to one another in 5:21. The first illustration of that is the wives being in subjection to her husband. But then the next command that's actually then kind of straightforward, being after a subject, is husbands, love your wives. And it gives them very specific things about giving yourself for your wife and all that sort of thing. And then when you get to child rearing, it's the fathers who are responsible. Colossians says much the same thing. Terry quoted 1 Peter 3, that the husband is supposed to live with his wife in an understanding way. I do not have to understand women. He never said that. And you're going to be distracted by an absolutely time-consuming and impossible hunt because all women are different. He asks me to understand one woman in the universe who's constantly changing, and that's Alice. And so you're on your own with your spouse, okay? But I am responsible for my behavior with regard to my wife. And I've got to keep, and let me just say, many of you are younger and don't get this yet. You know, they say every cell in your body changes every 7 years. And some in this room have had my marriage counseling classes before marriage, and you've heard this before. But that means that if you've been married for 50 years, you've been married to 8 different women. That's truer than you think. People change, and my responsibility, I made a commitment to love what she is becoming, not just what she was whenever I first met her. That's a different moving target, isn't it? And so Debbie's point is, I am responsible in my household to do what I can to cultivate this romance, to cultivate that relationship, and to know my wife. Does that get after what you're after, Debbie? Okay. Dave.
Slightly shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that strikes me, and you guys may have talked about this in some of the last weeks, was how often he says, my sister.
Yes.
My wife. Right? And so there's several things that are interesting about that. One of which is that he says sister before wife, not wife, sister, right? So he's prioritizing that relationship. Obviously, in our context, that brings us to our relationship as a sister in Christ, but in their context, they would have alluded to the fact that they had a very genealogically based society, and they were there to take care of their family, and a lot of times they were marrying people within their families, right? But the idea is that you have a basis of your relationship that runs maybe even deeper than the fact that you are married to them. And so that's, I think, significant for us as Christians, because they are also our sisters in Christ.
Yeah, David makes a great point at the way the language works. And this not only applies to this particular application Dave's making, but to a bunch of other stuff in this book. He says, my sister, my bride. And that there's a sense in which the first thing he says is sister. And David makes the point that if you're married to a Christian, that they're your sister in Christ. But that the bigger kind of point is that there's something more fundamental, I don't know, more fundamental is probably the wrong way of putting it, but something that produces a certain kind of equality and of station. A sister is not your mom. And a sister is not your daughter. A sister is a sibling. There's an equality there. And before he was married to Eve, he said, wow, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Language that's very similar to things that are said in other places in the Old Testament talking about the family unit that are not husband and wife. And so what is going on here then is to have this, we sometimes say, it's, start out being a friend and then become a wife or a husband, right? But it's deeper than our concept of friendship is not the Bible's concept of friendship. The 2 sermons I've heard on friendship since I've been here don't get into what the Old Testament says about friendship or the New Testament says about friendship in great detail. But when you actually do that, being a friend is making a statement about your loyalty, your alliance to them, your perception of them, your service for them. It's making it, you're like allies, but you're also intimate. And all of that, there's a sense, precedes this, wifey. I just, this personally, I have to really work at not hating that, wifey. I'm sure that other people can mean it in a different way than I hear it, so I forbear and forgive. But there's a sense in which this other relationship, this recognition of their dignity and their status, separate and apart from being my wife, is really important, and it builds into respect. Does that get at what you're after? Okay. Is that 5 minutes still? Okay, thank you. Grant had a hand. Yes.
Like Ecclesiastes, there's a time for every person, and the grass goes away. So there's a time for everything. You have to know when it's appropriate to do it. Proverbs are right in Proverbs. It says, like a city without walls is an enemy who lacks self-control.
Yeah.
And we see this beautiful picture of self-control, which means to adopt marriage, passionately loving each other.
Right.
And yet, over and over what we want expressed is do not overlove and overthink it.
Yes.
They understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Just have it, and you don't hand it here and saying, because God wouldn't want us to.
Right.
You have to express it, it's not good for us to throw off self-restraint until such time as it's appropriate to throw off self-restraint.
Yeah. Yeah. There's Grant Mulligan makes several terrific things to unpack. There are about 7 sermons there. That was just a terrific statement. It's going to be hard to, again, encapsulate much of that. But Proverbs has a lot to say about these issues. Ecclesiastes has a lot to say about these issues. And so it's important to do that, to go back and see what they say about marriage and about courtship and all that sort of thing. But most especially that there's a time for everything. And that there's a proper time. Don't awaken desire until love until it's desirable, till it's appropriate, till it fits. That's a terribly important thing in life, and the fact that involves self-discipline, and that we don't throw off self-restraint until it's ready. I would even say, even when it's ready, you do it in a way that's dignified and builds up the other person, and not just as interested in your own predatory desires. You have conversations about what kinds of things the partner wants. You try to do things that actually please both of you. And so the self-control thing, the idea that you can somehow have magic, I've got the magic grace card now. I can do anything I want in my marriage. I've heard that a lot in my lifetime, way in the 40s and the 50s, reading in the 40s, not hearing it. But on into the 60s. This is not a new thought. Not new at all. Self-control is always part of this process. And so it's important to recognize that. But self-control doesn't mean hating sex. It means honoring it in the ways that are most satisfying. Does that get after what you were after, Grant? Everybody see that point? I think it's terribly significant. And this whole conversation about Song of Solomon, I think, is something that fits in so many places in life. Other observations, then, that strikes you? Okay. Yeah, Norm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, Norm makes the point that it's very impressive to hear people who say they married their best friend when they really mean it. And that behaving as a friend is something that's kind of the fundamental building block then, that the passion then builds upon in a way. And this gets kind of what Terry was saying, that people will sometimes say to one another they would never say to a total stranger or even to an enemy. That's important. It's important for us to have the proper compassion and love to be able to fit with that. Does that get at what you're after, Norm? Yeah, go ahead. Right. They courted over a period of time. Right. We've run out of time. Yeah. Let me kind of, I'm going to just, please forgive me, but I'm going to just kind of guess at where you're going in this. When you have families picking who's going to get married, then you have to have a skill at learning how to love one another. And so that whenever somebody has picked your bride and you didn't know who she was, or your husband, it's good to have something like Song of Solomon to go to school on, to know how to talk to somebody and how to fall in love with somebody. And there's a whole lot about that I think is interesting. Is that fair?